The 70s birthed rock titans, but not every band that changed the sound of a generation made it into the spotlight. Some were overlooked, that is, until now. Today I'm shining a light on 7 more incredible bands that you've probably never heard of, but really should have. Let's give these legends the recognition that they deserve. Now, for this 3rd video in the series, I've altered the emphasis a little bit from forgotten to overlooked. I think this is a more realistic title, as some of you have commented on. Additionally, as a reminder, these are your choices, and thank you for that, and please keep them coming. Now, starting off today, we have Greenslade, who were a popular choice, and who were a British progressive rock band formed in 1972 by keyboardists Dave Greenslade and Dave Lawson. Known for their intricate keyboard-driven compositions, Greenslade stood out in the crowded prog rock scene of the 1970s. They released their self-titled debut album in 1973, and this had AllMusic describing them as a richly textured and sophisticated debut, brimming with melodic ideas. That same year, they followed it up with Bedside Manners Are Extra, and this featured a more cohesive blend of prog rock's classical influences and jazz fusion elements. Critics lauded the album for its adventurous sound. Melody Maker called it a hidden gem that showcased Greenslade's experimental flair. In 1974, the band released Spyglass Guest, and this saw them exploring more ambitious arrangements. Chris Welsh, the music journalist, said of this album, "Greenslade were on the verge of something great. This is prog at its most imaginative." However, commercial success eluded them. Their 4th album, Time and Tide, in 1975, was their last before they disbanded. Now, although they were critically praised, particularly for sophisticated compositions and emotive lyrics, the group struggled to find a larger audience, making them one of 70's overlooked prog innovators. The 2nd band this time around is Jade Warrior, who were formed in 1970 by Tony Duhigg and John Field. Now, these guys blended progressive rock with world music, particularly Eastern influences, creating an atmospheric and ethereal sound unique for its time. Their self-titled debut from 1971 was praised for its innovative use of flute, percussion and ambient textures. Rolling Stone called it an evocative fusion of progressive rock and exotic sounds. They followed it up with Released in 1971, and this was heavier and more aggressive, but still deeply experimental. Mojo magazine said, "Jade Warrior stood at the intersection of world music and prog, forging a path that few dared to follow." Last Autumn's Dream in 1972 leading even more into the mystical, introspective side, earning high praise for its lush arrangements and sophisticated mood. But after signing with Island Records, Jade Warrior embarked on a trilogy of concept albums, starting with Floating World in 1974, Waves in 1975 and Kites in 1976. These albums explored more abstract ambient landscapes, with The Guardian stating, "Jade Warrior invented ambient rock before it even had a name." Though they never achieved that mainstream success, their influence on ambient and experimental music has endured over the decades. Caravan emerged from the Canterbury scene in 1968, mixing psychedelic rock, jazz and classical influences. Their self-titled debut from 1968 featured whimsical but intricate compositions that hinted at the unique sound that they would soon perfect. Uncut call it a blueprint for complex yet accessible sound of Canterbury prog. Their breakout came with the album In the Land of Grey and Pink in 1971, and this is a masterpiece often cited as one of the defining albums of that Canterbury scene. It makes those playful lyrics with extended jazz-infused prog jams, such as the sidelong track 9 Feet Underground. Prog magazine said, "The quintessential Canterbury prog album, at once whimsical, quirky and virtuosic." They followed with Waterloo Lily in 1972, which leaned into jazz fusion, featuring more structured and groove-based tunes. Though well received, it didn't reach the heights of Grey and Pink. Subsequent releases, such as For Girls Who Go Plump in the Night and Cunning Stunts, continued to showcase the band's humour, tight musicianship and ever-evolving sound. Now, while they never quite broke into the mainstream, Caravan remain a beloved prog rock act with a loyal following. Founded in 1969 by the visionary Florian Frick, Popol Vuh pioneered electronic music and helped define the sound of krautrock movement. Their debut album, Affenstüd in 1970, was one of the first to use the Moog synthesizer extensively, blending it with organic elements to create a mystical, otherworldly sound. Pitchfork wrote, Popol Vuh's early work was an audio exploration of spiritual and cosmic. With In the Garden Pharos, 1971, they delved deeper into ambient and meditative soundscapes. The use of natural instruments like piano and percussion against electronic textures in the album a reputation for bridging traditional and modern worlds. In 1972, Frick abandoned the synthesizer and returned to acoustic instruments with Hosseina Mantra, a beautiful vision of Eastern spiritual music and Western classical traditions. Why I called it an album of profound beauty and spiritual resonance. Throughout the 70s they provided the soundtracks for Werner Herzog's films, including Aguila, The Wrath of God from 1972, cementing their legacy as atmospheric composers. Albums like Let's Say Tag, Let's Say Nacht in 1976 continued to explore the interplay between spirituality and sound, and this made Popol Vuh a pivotal influence on ambient and experimental music. The band Clouds, originally known as 1-2-3, were a Scottish prog rock trio formed in 1966, often regarded as early innovators of progressive rock. Now, they signed with Island Records in 1968 and released their debut album Scrapbook in 1969. And this was a mixture of jazz-inflected progressive rock with complex arrangements. Melody Maker noted, Clouds are crafting a new form of rock, one that blends classical structure with rock's energy. Their second album, Up Above Our Heads in 1970, this saw the band refining their sound further with extended instrumental passages and intricate vocal harmonies. Now, while critically well received, they did struggle commercially, which kept them under the radar. The final album, Watercolour Days in 1971, was the most ambitious yet, featuring lush orchestral arrangements, but it really failed to break into the mainstream. Music critic David Frick praised their work as ahead of its time, but Clouds disbanded in 1971, remaining a cult favourite for progressive rock historians. Eloy were a German progressive rock band formed in 1969 by Frank Bornemann and were known for blending space rock with symphonic elements. Now, they developed a loyal following in Europe, although they never gained the same international recognition as some of their peers. Their early albums like Eloy 1971 and Inside 1973 had a raw, experimental sound, with Inside marking the beginning of their space rock era. Floating from 1974 continued down that path, but it was with the power and the passion in 1975 that Eloy started to reach wider acclaim. The album was a concept piece that told a time travel story, blended progressive rock with theatrical storytelling. However, its ambitious narrative was divisive, and some critics finding it overly complicated. Eloy reached their peak with Dawn in 1976 and Ocean in 1977, both of which established them as one of Germany's premier prog bands. Ocean in particular was hailed as a masterpiece, with its expansive cosmic themes and intricate compositions. Sounds magazine called it an essential album for any fan of space rock or symphonic prog. Now, despite the shifting trends and several lineup changes, Eloy remained active into the 1980s and beyond. Their legacy is strong in Europe, though they were often overlooked in the UK and US prog scenes. The Enid formed in 1973, led by composer Robert John Godfrey. Fusing symphonic classical music with progressive rock, the Enid created lush, orchestral compositions that stood apart from the heavier guitar-driven prog bands of the time. Their debut album, In the Region of the Summer Stars in 1976, was a symphonic masterpiece. Prog magazine called it as a towering achievement in blending classical composition with the emotional sweep of rock. Followed it with Airy Fairy Nonsense from 1977, And this was an album that took the symphonic approach even further. And despite little radio play, it really gained quite a cult following. Godfrey's background as a classical musician brought an almost cinematic quality to their work, and The Guardian hailed Enid as the most distinctive band of their time, though this remained a niche act. Their commitment to pushing boundaries between rock and classical music made them one of the most unique bands to emerge from the progressive rock era, and this left an enduring legacy among prog rock fans and classical rock enthusiasts alike. So thank you for your suggestions this time around. There are some superb bands in here that were sadly overlooked. Now this is the third video in the series, as I said, and for those who didn't watch the original, then this is the video that I want you to watch next, and I'll see you over there.